Good afternoon. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to today's panel discussion on the role of gas in South Africa's energy transition. As South Africa charts its course towards improved energy security and a more sustainable energy future, our distinguished panel of experts will explore the role of gas in the country's energy mix. We hope that today's webinar will offer viewers deep insights into the challenges and opportunities facing South Africa as the country advances its energy transition. Our webinar today is sponsored by Wärtsilä Energy, Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, Energas, and CNG Holdings. We thank our sponsors for their support in making this event possible. Before we get started, please be aware we have enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A box. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will answer as many of your questions as possible during the webinar. To encourage interactions, we've also enabled the chat function. You'll also find this at the bottom of your screen. Please don't, however, post any questions in the chat box as we may miss them. You can post all your questions into the Q&A instead. Please be aware, we are recording this webinar and we'll be sending the recording to you when it's available. We're also streaming the webinar live to YouTube and we'll share the link in the chat soon. Today's webinar will be facilitated by Jaco Himan, an Executive Officer of the Industrial Gas Users Association Southern Africa and Chair of the BUSA Gas Energy Subcommittee. He's a seasoned leader in gas energy strategy, policy and pricing. He's also held senior positions at Eskom from 1994 to 2002, and he has degrees in economics from the University of Stellenbosch. Jaco will facilitate the discussion with our panel, which consists of Steve Nicholls, the mitigation team leader for South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission, Muzi Shange, COO of Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, Todd Johnson, General Manager for Strategic Relations and Business in Africa at Wärtsilä Energy, and Keith Webb, Executive Committee Member for Infrastructure Sector Solutions at RMB. I'll hand over now to our facilitator, Jaco Himan, to continue with the proceedings. Over to you, Jaco.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you for the introduction. We're happy, of course, to have this conversation today. It certainly comes at a time in the South African history where it needs to capitalize on gas energy for various reasons. There is industrial requirements, there's requirements for power, and we're finding ourselves in a world which is actually quite polarized in a way, in the sense that we faced with a gas to power policy where there's significant reliance on gas energy or gas to power, and from this, then, you know, on the opposite side of that, we also faced with severe gas energy shortages at the same time. So these sort of conflicting positions certainly makes for interesting times. There are various risks that we're faced with from the energy perspective in South Africa that we're all aware of. But I think today's conversation will hopefully shed light to these sort of developments. What I will do, we have sort of certain questions, you know, and I will start asking our panelists certain questions and followed by a short introduction, and we'll try and keep the conversation fluid, and we certainly invite you to post pertinent questions. We may not get to all of them, but we will certainly try and pick up on the most pertinent ones that we see. So with that, welcome once again, and thank you to the Engineering News Creamer Media for hosting this event. Steve, if I may start with you. Steve, of course, leads the South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission's mitigation team. He has a background at the National Business Initiative, Accenture, and KPMG. Steve brings strategic expertise to integrating climate considerations into economic planning, and his experience spans diverse sectors across various regions around the globe: Europe, Southern and East Africa, across various sectors: the mining, telecoms, government, electrical energy, oil and gas, financial services, and retail. Steve, very welcome to you, and again, thank you very much for joining us. If I may start, maybe just as an opening question, you are obviously at the center of the energy transition space, working closely on government's position around that and the policy formation. But given that, I mean, what role is gas expected to play in South Africa's energy transition and in restoring our energy security?
Yeah, so I could take the full hour answering that question, but as a quick highlight, it depends on who you ask and the assumptions people have about the future. So just to say that, the stakeholder community is fairly divided on the role of gas, with some people believing there's no role of gas, and on the other end of the spectrum, people believing that we should be investing significantly in domestic gas resources. We recently, as the PCC, did a review of major energy studies in South Africa, those done by UCT, the NBI, the CSIR, and more recently by Bloomberg, published at the end of last year, looking at the role of gas, particularly in electricity and energy. But I would say, though, that you can't really have this discussion thinking just about electricity. The interrelation of gas demand across the various demand sources is critical for securing supply. But just particularly on electricity, all of those studies show that the cheapest electricity system going forward for South Africa is a combination of variable renewable energy, peaking support, and storage. And that storage could either be pumped hydro or batteries. And that peaking support is predominantly gas across all the models. That is what they're selecting. So we certainly see a role for in that sort of context for gas providing this peaking support, which is essential for variable renewable energy systems to provide energy security. The options about where you get that gas, whether you source it locally or whether you import LNG, is really the key topic of debate.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, how do you see this debate trending? I mean, if we also, of course, live close to this debate. I mean, from an industrial energy perspective, by and large, but over time, we see how the debate sort of moves around and follows certain trends or directions. I mean, would you like to sort of expand a little bit on that from your perspective, how you see the debate evolving?
Yeah, so the key challenge in the debate is how you see the future world changing under climate conditions. So if we look at International Energy Agency projections for future electricity systems against a range of temperature goals, if you're going for a net zero scenario, in other words, you're phasing fossil fuels out of the economy by 2050, then gas demand drops off significantly by 2050. It at least halves, probably more than that. And so what you end up in is a world where if you're wanting to develop domestic gas resources, you have to be competitive in this world. And so there you're competing against cost advantage shale gas in the US, and you're competing against Saudi mega refineries and Saudi mega investment. And so any investment decision you make in domestic supply is in that context. That's a fairly long-term perspective. In the short term, it's unlikely that any of those domestic resources will be provided. And so the question is, how do we resolve some of the short-term supply constraints that we do have, what they commonly refer to as the gas cliff coming in a couple of years' time. And there are your only real options are LNG. And so the debate is, how quickly can we get these LNG resources online? Would we provide them through Mozambique, or would we provide them through KZN? It looks likely that providing through Mozambique is a shorter term, quicker turnaround option. But that's kind of where the debate is at the moment. And of course, we're stuck in the commercialization. So I referred earlier that there was peaking support in the electricity studies, but these are relatively small utilization peaking plants and not enough to anchor sort of gas contracts. And And so getting back to this point about energy as a whole, how we aggregate demand across industry, Sasol is obviously an important player, transport potentially, and electricity. And in order to be able to commercialize these gas contracts is where the debate is. I think we're probably trending, to answer your specific question, negatively here. I'm not sure that we're going to get organized quickly enough to be able to get these resources on time. And that may have a particularly large impact on industry sustainability, those that are currently dependent on gas for their manufacturing.
Just briefly focusing on the availability of domestic gas, and of course, there's a significant difference, to your point around the reliance on more expensive LNG and the availability of natural gas domestically. If you take a view that says let's work with what we've got, do you see a role around potentially Luiperd Brolpadda, which is been sitting for some time, waiting to be monetized? I mean, it's probably the only bulk resource of gas that can be monetized over a relatively short period of time. How do you see that sort of fit into sort of the medium term?
Yeah, so there I would have to say that there's not enough information in the public space in South Africa for us to make a proper call on that. I think people believe the Brolpadda and Luiperd finds to be further along the maturity spectrum than they are in reality. And the key variable there is going to be sufficient demand in order to justify that investment. If we can't get enough demand to land LNG, I can't see South Africa generating enough domestic demand to drive investment in that infrastructure. And therefore, you would still be reliant on export demand. And therefore priced in dollars. And so the sort of price volatility in gas is a big variable, and the models are extremely sensitive to that. But most importantly, you're in this competition scenario. So whether those resources are financially viable or not depends on your assumptions around global demand, which again depends on your assumptions around the speed at which countries around the world develop climate policies. But we're already seeing that the IRA is causing a decrease in domestic demand for gas in the US, which means that their gas producers are also looking to export markets. And so, my personal view is that it will be difficult to commercialize those opportunities. But as I say, not really enough hardcore data on this topic to really make a call.
Muzi, if I can turn to you, Muzi Shange. He is the COO of the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone and has more than 2 decades of experience in business strategy and operations, economic development and transformation. Muzi also has experience in land and infrastructure development, project and program management, as well as energy and environmental sustainability. Muzi, Richards Bay is becoming a key point for the development of gas to power in South Africa. But again, we're sitting with polarizing positions. We don't have infrastructure, etc. And your organization, of course, has a critical role to play potentially in both. But Richards Bay seems to be emerging as this major gas hub in South Africa. Why is the region bullish about gas?
No, thank you very much, Jaco, and greetings to your listeners, and thanks for arranging this particular webinar. If I were to respond in simplistic terms in a point form, I would say the issue of location, the issue of existing infrastructure, and the issue of confirmed demand will probably be the key points that get Richards Bay to be quite bullish about it. And what do I mean about that? In terms of the location, we are obviously located in the port of Richards Bay, which is a deep sea water port that allows for us to build the importation facilities for LNG. In terms of the infrastructure, we already do have existing infrastructure that links up to Richards Bay. When we're talking about Mozambique, we as Richards Bay already have a link to Secunda, through the Romco pipeline, which then comes down to link to us, and with the Lily pipeline down through the picking stations into Durban, you are able to leverage on that existing infrastructure. But over and above that, you have the recent developments insofar as the development of gas importation facilities. You would have noticed through the media and through confirmed reports around the TNPA, VOPEC, Transnet pipeline consortium that will then be developing the import facility. So we are quite excited by that, because as the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, which in the main has a key responsibility of ensuring that we increase the export basket of South Africa through industrialization, through the beneficiation of South Africa's raw material. We are a home to major industrial players, of which, Jaco, you will confirm that some of these industrial players are members of the Industrial Gas Users Association. You have your Rio Tinto, you have your RBMs, you have your Tronox, you have your Foscos in Richards Bay, and these are major industries. And with the gas cliff that we are looking at, with large gas industrial users that are starting to prepare for what is likely to be the next disaster insofar as the shortage of natural gas, as the Richards Bay ITZ, we are positioning ourselves to respond to this particular challenge. And therefore, we are quite bullish about it. And it's based on facts, it's based on what is existing. If you look at the gas projects, the gas to power investments, all the gas to power investments that are planned in the Richards Bay are sitting within the special economic zone. The 3,000 megawatts of gas to power that is planned, that has got a Section 34 determination, is a project that is sitting within the Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone. So we are quite bullish about it. But where the gap is around having to agree on the gas sourcing strategy. And I think the point that Steve is raising will remain a point that keeps to be open, and we are not firming it up around whether gas is going to be coming through the import facility in Richards Bay or whether it's going to be coming through Mozambique. And at some point, we need to crunch those numbers and look at the timelines and see which one is most feasible. And if Mozambique is more feasible and is quicker, then what are we saying insofar as the import terminal? Are we going to generate sufficient demand to justify the import terminal investments? So those are some of the things that I think the conversation needs to be about. But as the Richards Bay ATZ, we are quite excited, because for us to be able to drive the kind of industrialization that we are seeing growing with all the new investments that are coming within the zone, we definitely have to look at gas as an option and as a transition fuel going forward.
I want to sort of expand a little bit on one or two comments you've made around timelines. I mean, you obviously very close to the ground with all these developments and plans, but how would you place these timelines and its dependencies? You know, I mean, if we talk about LNG infrastructure development, gas to power establishment, marine infrastructure development. How do you see these playing out over the next 2 years, or then beyond that point in time? And I'm specifically referring to the pending gas issue or cliff that is now surfaced.
Well, you will have to look at it from, I missed the first part. I think it was the internet issue, but I think I got the gist of your question.
It's just around the timelines, yeah, Muzi, around you know, how you see it from your perspective.
Look, Jaco, There are different components into it. We are obviously excited with the first part of it, which is the import terminal. And we understand that this will be ready at around 27, 28. And there is a lot of work that is happening right now insofar as the preliminary engineering designs and having to confirm that open user access point, which is quite important to us, because from that point, we are able to start working on our transmission reticulation infrastructure designs that will allow for infrastructure that will feed into the gas to power sites. We've got a couple of sites. It's not just one site. Phase 1D, which is the host for Eskom. We've got phase 1C, which is a host for another investment. And we've got phase 1F, which is a host to two sites that were qualifying bids in terms of the risk mitigation bids, which I'm sure they will then be responding in terms of the 2,000 that was recently issued. So we will need to close that gap. But before we even talk about the reticulation infrastructure networks, we need to agree on the gas aggregation component. How do we ensure that we aggregate this demand so that in turn we are able to aggregate the gas price? Because if we are to go with what the bid is saying right now, that it's limiting to 1,000 megawatts and everyone must source their own gas to a capacity maximum of 1,000, then we have a challenge. The challenge that I think Steve is also raising. So we will need to deal with that particular component and agree who will need to then, or at least is strategically positioned to assist insofar as the gas aggregation is concerned. As the Richards Bay IDZ, we are looking at that. We are also in engagements with NERSA insofar as the application for the reticulation infrastructure is concerned, because our interest is to play at a level of the pipeline molecule moving from the terminal going into the gas to power plants, the gas to power plants generating their power, but also post that we have realized that most of them, they do want to get offtakes. And many of these offtakers are locators within the Richards Bay IDZ. So we are able to also find ourselves playing in that space, and that in the sense is where we will definitely want to play. So if you look at it, Jaco, there is a dependence and an important dependency here, which in the main is the Transnet VOPEC import terminal. Without that aspect, our projects are quite exposed, and we are staying very close into that conversation to ensure that there is an alignment insofar as the planned projects and what Transnet is busy with. We have collaborations with them. We have standing meetings with them. Tomorrow we are engaging again as the Provincial Steering Committee on these matters to ensure that there's alignment insofar as the infrastructure development is concerned. The gas to power part is closing in August. Everyone is aware of that. So that will be the timeline insofar at least that aspect is concerned.
Thanks, Muzi. I want to move on to Todd Johnson from Wärtsilä. Todd has been in different management positions within Wärtsilä Energy business for more than 30 years. He is presently the General Manager of Strategic Relations and Business for South and East Africa. He's well known in this part of the world on his technical expertise around gas to power. He holds an electrical engineering degree from Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden. Todd, what role can Wärtsilä Energy play in easing the South Africa's energy crisis through the deployment of gas to power projects?
Good afternoon all, and thank you, Jaco, for the question. So it's clear that the electricity and heat production is the world's largest source of carbon emissions. So the speed of energy transition will determine whether we can achieve the global decarbonization goals. In South Africa, we have followed for many years. We installed our first gas-to-power plant in 2012, and 175 megawatt in Sasolburg. And we see now that the coal is being decommissioned, and there is a steady growth on renewables coming online. There are more projected in the IRP, and also more is probably going to be needed beyond what's visible in the IRP. However, we have seen throughout the world where we work that when the renewables are not available, you need flexible technologies, you need some gas power solutions that is flexible. So we provide the engines for that. And you also need energy storage to balance the renewables and ensure reliability to the system. So from the engine gas power plant side, we see that we are providing balancing to the system. So it's on minute, daily, or seasonal basis, but also it can provide base load if the demand is extremely high. I agree with Steve that the trend for the gas power plants is that they are going to peak more and more. So a lot of starts and stops, a lot maybe also part load operation. So there is of course important that the systems are installed are having the best efficiency and meeting these requirements. And we can see now in that tender that is out for the gas to power program that these requirements has been specified in the tender. And I think we will also see that technology will be both some CCGTs will participate, but also from our side, I'm pretty sure we will participate with our solutions, providing these solutions into the tender requirements. Another thing that is important for South Africa is, of course, we see now the tender is done to source these functions that you need: start, stop, ramp up, ramp down. You need part load efficiency, as described in the tender documents. But we also see that South Africa is undergoing a market reform. So there will be in the future different monetary markets for day ahead, balancing, capacity, ancillary services, and these which then will be priced at the market. So from this end, it's really important that you have a solution installed in the system today that also can meet the future requirements of the system. And I think here from our side, as we are global, we have seen this transition that South Africa is having already have happened in many countries where we have operated. So some years ahead of South Africa, and some countries are lagging behind South Africa. So the trend is quite clear what is going to happen in the system in the future. And yeah, we have modeled this from various angles, and yes, we believe we have a solution that can contribute this in South Africa.
Keith, if I can move to you, thanks, Todd, for those insights. By way of introduction, for those that don't know Keith Webb, he is on the executive committee of RMB's Infrastructure Sector Solutions team. Excuse me. He is responsible for driving initiatives in midstream gas infrastructure and private power. Prior to joining RMB over 15 years ago, Keith advised multinationals on their corporate and investment strategies in Africa. Keith has a BSc degree and an MBA from Kellogg School of Management. Keith, welcome. If I may fall straight into it, how is RMB applying its experience in the renewable energy space to the developments on the local gas to power side of things?
Yeah, thanks, Jaco, and good afternoon, everyone. So most of the participants here will be aware that there's substantial experience that the banking sector has in the renewable space and in funding those projects. And I think the gas IPP space levers on that substantially, but there are probably three broader elements that we can split this sector into. The first, the power generation side, looks very similar to what we've done on the renewable side. Maybe there's a slightly different commercial arrangement around, the power purchase agreement having an availability charge and then a utilization charge, whereas renewables, you pretty much you just get every electron that comes out of it. But it looks like a very similar funding structure, and I think the sector generally has a lot of experience in that. And these are big capital projects, so invariably there's a lot of funding that goes into that. The second element is around supply chain, the gas or the LNG import terminal, the regasification side. And while that's a little bit more of a newer way of thinking in South Africa, it looks like a concession. And I think Transnet has run its RFP process, and as Musi was saying earlier, there isn't a bid that's been awarded. And that looks like a standard concession, which we as the sector funded substantially over the years, whether it's roads, etc. The one that I think as a country we probably less experienced at is certainly on the LNG supply side. And looking at some of the questions, Yusuf, I did see your question. And I'm not sure if we have gotten the commercial thought around how LNG is going to be supplied into this gas IPP program quite optimized. We don't necessarily need to bank that sector. It's just a part of the cost flow through in this gas IPP program. But the commercial construct around that needs to be thought through very carefully to make it efficient and cost effective.
I want to expand a little bit on those comments. I mean, what we read into these RFP documents at the moment, these gas to power documents, of course, and I want to tag on to Yusuf's question around the load factor requirement. It's 40 to 65% with 25% down the track. Now, the question to you from a funding perspective, a bankability perspective, Keith, how do you balance this absolute flexibility to a world where, if you look at international gas supply, if you look at LNG infrastructure or gas infrastructure, it needs consistency, it needs volume throughput, and it needs a rhythm almost, in order to optimize the system. So my question to you is, from your perspective, is how do you balance the requirements of the RFP with this supply chain, upstream supply chain variability that it imposes on those systems, supply systems, storage, etc., and of course the cost that comes with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in all of these investments, the only way one can actually make these investments is to be certain on your recovery of your capital. So, if you look at the power side of things, that's why you have to have an availability charge. The country, we will be paying for that kit being there available. By the way, the peaking power plants that are already in existence work on that basis. So that's how you recover your capital on the power side. On the import terminal, there's no view a banker can take on whether it's 65, 25, or 45%, utilization. It has to be fully recovered, to get the capital in there. And so the import terminal, what it effectively means is that it has to be a fixed charge to use the terminal, no matter what the volume is. The problem the sector has is exactly that variability that you say that we're looking for. So if you have a low utilization, the effective cost per kilowatt hour, if you will, or per kilojoule of gas, the effective cost will have to go up per unit. But I think commercially, one can't take that view of variability. One has to have a fixed charge for the import infrastructure.
Keith, I'm turning to Steve, I'm turning to you on just want to tag on to this particular point. I mean, if there are inherent inefficiencies, what we've highlighted now because of these peaking requirements, the very deep peaking requirements, if there are inherent cost efficiencies that we will have to bear, where does the trade-off sit elsewhere? Where does it sit in the electricity space, in the power space?
Yeah, so I think you want to, when we're thinking about gas infrastructure in the electricity space, you want to avoid fossil fuels as much as you can, both from a climate and a financial perspective. So one of the trade-offs of having more emissions, so which, any kind of gas running at mid-merit or base load would make our economy more emissions intensive, means that we're less trade competitive. So when you're thinking about things like EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, you're going to pay higher tariffs and therefore potentially be less competitive. And then from a financial perspective, you carry a whole bunch of risk across balance of payments, where we're going to get the domestic currency to pay for these imports. Forex, if Forex swings 30%, which it sometimes does in South Africa, that can really put a strain on the fiscus, and then just inherent variability in the gas price. So these are risks that you have to deal with, which means you can't have a purely fixed price based approach. You're going to have to be hedging that risk at a sort of per kilowatt hour unit, and again, that's going to drive you to use less gas. But of course, that is dependent on you getting the rest of your infrastructure sorted out. So it's possible that if we were to invest in gas, and I think we should be very careful about distinguishing between installed capacity and capacity factors. So we might have quite a big installed capacity base of gas, but we would be running those plants at very low utilization levels, making the capital recovery difficult. But also you have to do that capital recovery before 2050. Because you have to phase these gas entities out of the economy, or you have to switch them to hydrogen, which would be significantly more expensive, or you would have to include some kind of carbon capture and storage or direct air capture, which would also be significantly more expensive. And so as time goes by, the desirability of these gas resources declines. And so really the key variable here is how quickly can you build the rest of the enabling infrastructure, which includes fast rollout of renewable energy as well as investments in the grid that Muzi mentioned. So those are some of the trade-offs, but really what we're after here is a electricity system that is cost competitive locally and enabling a broader industrialization of the economy, what we'd like to call a green industrialization of the economy, and that in turn will impact international competitiveness and the growth at which South Africa can achieve.
Steve, there's of course recent talks, as we all know, around the gas cliff, the availability of gas in South Africa, the current gas flow that we see in KZN and Gauteng and Mpumalanga. What are your views around this? How do we approach this? How do we solve this? And what are the big pieces that we got to move in order to bridge this this particular gas cliff?
Yeah, again, we need another hour on this. Just for those who are not too clear on what the gas cliff is, currently South Africa gets most of its gas supplied via Sasol from Pandatemane. And that gas resource is running out and will run out relatively soon, sometime between 2026 and 2028. And in an attempt to secure supply, Sasol have basically said they will not retail gas onto existing users from around 2026. And Jaco, correct me if I get any of this underlying facts wrong here. And so that puts huge pressure on domestic industry that are using gas. And that is a kind of double whammy for industry, because in some cases they could electrify, but of course electricity supply is disrupted, and in order to get return on your assets, you need to run these assets 24 hours a day, and so if you can only run them 10 or 12 hours a day, you start to run into financial problems. So that's kind of the challenge that we have, and to resolve that we need some kind of gas supply. And so, as we mentioned earlier, those options are either through Muzi and Richards Bay, or they are through the sort of investments that are happening in Mozambique. But at the very least, there's some infrastructure measures that need to be put into place. We need to start investigating what it would cost to link the sort of Mozambique, Maputo investments to the existing pipelines into South Africa. We would need to invest how we connect Lily to those pipelines, so that we can at least think about how we distribute this gas wherever we supply it. But I think Keith's point about the LNG supply side contracting is really the key. And Muzi's mentioned this, and I think Todd mentioned as well. How we aggregate that demand is really important. To commercialize this kind of thing, we need roughly 100 petajoules, maybe slightly more of demand. We already don't have that. And so that then becomes a question about the trade-off. If this gas supply is so necessary from a GDP perspective of keeping industry going, what kind of sacrifices could we make on the power side in order to create sufficient demand, acknowledging that that would make electricity more expensive and potentially create the risk of stranded assets. So this is a very complicated debate and something that needs a lot more public engagement. So this kind of discussion is really exciting.
Do you think we have the time for these debates?
It's the answer is no. We have to be able to have these debates really quickly and make some of these investments really quickly. So 2026 is just around the corner. My suspicion is that we probably will not get this infrastructure in place by 2026. And so then the next question is, how do we support that industry with other kinds of incentives, with electricity supply, with alternate generation options? And really what we should be doing as a country is pursuing multiple strategies. We should be building renewable energy as fast as we can. We should be improving the grid as fast as we can. We should be investigating improving EAF as fast as we can. And we should be looking at these gas options as fast as we can.
Muzi, turning again to Richards Bay, I mean, seeing that the TNPA has awarded the terminal project to a consortium by Vopak and Transnet Pipelines, what are these sort of collaborations that you see emerging at the moment? I mean, around industry, the demand for power, and how do you see this manifest in actually shovels in the ground, and developments, you know?
Thank you, Jaco. I guess the collaboration starts with just appreciating the impact that gas users have on our economy. And if we are to get to a gas cliff, what's the impact on the socioeconomic side? The reality is, as we sit here today, the gas users contribute between 300 to 500 billion rand in the economy of this country per annum. And it employs almost 70,000 plus people. So if we are to get to 2026 without these solutions, what does it mean for an ordinary person on the ground? And this is where I think strengthening this collaboration becomes quite important, when you understand not just from the business side, but also from the social side, the impact that it will have on the social side. I do think that the collaboration between ourselves as the host of the gas investments, the gas to power investments, the collaboration that needs to be there and exist between government and the private sector, the collaboration that must happen within government institutions in the case of the Richards Bay IDZ, TNPA, TPL, together with those private sector partners is quite crucial. But we also do need efficient local government that can be able to assist us insofar as ensuring that the infrastructure, in this case, the reticulation infrastructure, can be put in bed quite quickly. The lands and rights issues sometimes can take long, and therefore the turnaround time for infrastructure takes longer. we can be able to expedite these issues if we have this kind of collaboration without leaving out the communities that are affected by some of this investment. In the Richards Bay ITZ or the Richards Bay in general, we are surrounded by a number of communities, a number of traditional authorities, some who have a claim in the land that needs to be utilized for some of these investments. How do we ensure that we leave no one behind? And all these partners are consulted, are forming part of the solution so that we don't come up with the solutions that leave these communities out of the conversation. So I do think that the collaboration that needs to happen is quite a wide range of collaborations that must happen across the different business spectrum within government, outside of government, with the private sector, and across the different spectrums.
Thanks, Muzi. Turning towards perhaps more a technical question around that, but given the technology that Wärtsilä offers to the market globally, I mean, how do you find the cost effectiveness of gas-based electricity generation compared with alternative sources? And if you can sort of, in a South African context.
So from our perspective, we don't see them as competing with each other. We see them as complementary to each other as generation sources. So renewables are already the cheapest form of new power generation added into the system. There is no doubt about it. And we see the wind and the solar are dominating for the clean energy markets around the world. What we see when we have done, I think we have done power modeling in more than 190 countries or regions to see how do you reach 100% renewables. And reaching the 80% is manageable of investing in. So you add renewables, you add some flexibility into the system, you phase out the most dirtiest inflexible plants you are having, in many cases coal. But then you come to Steve's, then you need to do the conversion. And you need to then also phase out the flexible gas plants that you have used for a number of years. And then you need to replace those with carbon neutral fuels like hydrogen. So for us as a company, it's of course crucial that we have solutions that provides the flexibility with the fuel gas that is available now. And we see that the running hours is declining in every country, but that doesn't mean that the solution is providing the value that the energy system is needed. And also it supports then that you reduce curtailment of the renewable energy sources. And here is a question, of course, maybe to some of the other panelists in South Africa here. For the renewable PPAs that are there, how much curtailment is actually done from those investments that has been done in the system? I'm not sure anybody knows it, but I'm sure there is some curtailment. And how do we address it? Is it through having more, let's say, balancing flexibility in the system? Is it a transmission line issue? I guess there are a number of actions that can be taken around it. But for us, it's important also that we have the conversion and the packages to convert to the sustainable fuels. So today we are running on 25% hydrogen mix. We will have a conversion package for our solutions ready in a couple of years. But that will be different in different markets, depending on what the economics also will tell for converting to hydrogen. So we see also this in a 10, 15, 20-year time before the full conversions are done of all gas plants to hydrogen. But we as a supplier of this solution, we need to be prepared, and we need to have it ready when the market is asking. Another topic I want to reach on or make a comment on maybe is on this aggregation and infrastructure. So what we have seen in the northern hemisphere, so if you take Germany, Finland, Estonia, etc., where the government or governmental body have taken an initiative and taking the investment on the infrastructure side. So basically the fixed cost that was there has been taken by it, and in Northern Europe has maybe been more on the security of supply reasoning, because we have a war going on in the close neighboring hood. So there the government have taken the fixed cost and the fixed asset, which everybody then is paying that fixed fee. But then there is an open access on the storage and the throughput, which then is paid by aggregators and then finally to the end off taker. But I have not really seen this combined willingness yet in South Africa. I see there is in Richards Bay now some attempt for this, and maybe also some more from the CEF, is a Central Energy Fund, is going to maybe act in a more active way through their subsidiaries, etc. But I leave this as a food for thought for the rest of panelists, including yourself, Jaakko. Thank you.
But just another question from my end, and I'm tagging on to comments Steve made earlier around the urgency and the speed that we need to bring in renewable transmission, gas infrastructure, and associated power generation. In Wärtsilä's experience globally, if you've reached a critical renewable penetration point, let's say of 5%, let's say you have an energy mix, power mix, and you sitting at a relatively low 5% level. I think that's more or less, Steve, just correct me if I'm wrong, if that's the renewable penetration level in our power mix at the moment.
Sorry, I missed the number you gave.
5% is that more or less where South Africa sits?
6%, some 7% sometimes.
Yeah. Todd, the question is, in your experience globally, I mean, how long does it take for countries to move from a 5% to a 20 to a 40 to 100% renewable penetration rate practically? I mean, we're talking here about practical considerations in terms of balancing this whole system and to flip over to renewables.
Well, thank you for the question, Jaakko. I think I will pause on that because it's an impossible question to answer, because each country has their own challenges and there are so many factors that is happening. But we can see, of course, that if there is a combined will and effort from the government, all the governmental bodies, everything that is related, and they are kind of prioritizing this fully, I think from an industrial perspective, to be able to supply the need and construct the plants and installation that is required, those are there. So I think from that, and the industry is ready, and we see also on the hydrogen side that there is much of development happening. There are studies going, there are pilots being done, there are views going forward. From our side, we invest 100 million euro in R&D together with another cluster of Nordic companies, another 100 million. So it's a 200 million euro on autonomous and sustainable power generation. So this is, of course, crucial also that we from the industry side is investing money in R&D and how the future will look like, because we need to be ready and able to provide the solutions that the grid system of today and of the future is going to require. So I'm sorry, Jaakko, I'm not able to give you any if it's a 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. I'm sure there are research and statistic companies that might have put that together, but I do not have it available.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect, Todd. I won't hold you to it. Keith, turning to yourself, I mean, we've heard this afternoon about various references from our panel around the role of a gas aggregator and the need for that in South Africa. In RMB's sort of world, how do you see, what is that role of a gas aggregator? What is the risk that he needs to assume in becoming an aggregator, and how is he covered, and how does he mitigate those particular financial risks?
Yeah, so I mean, the gas aggregator does exactly what it says on the tin, that he's got to aggregate the demand of gas so that you get to some sort of scaled contracting ability. I mean, that's step one. Step two, you could see that that would be the entity that needs to actually commit to whatever, a fixed usage arrangement with the import terminal, and maybe to make sure that the logistics works and is put in place. I had the joy of working with the West African gas aggregator, and it was absolutely critical. They were very clear that their role is not to take risk, but to actually match their supply and demand exactly. They were taking no view on, over purchasing gas to don't speculate. So that's a very important thought that one needs to put in the flea in the ear of the gas aggregator. They're not there to take market risk and speculate. But as I say, their main role, their primary role, is to aggregate, to scale up the supply, and then to give sufficient balance sheet support to the logistics chain.
Keith, I mean, where do you see the investment requirements in South Africa in our gas landscape and power landscape, for that matter, if you want to match the two?
Yeah, I think as was mentioned earlier, we do have gas infrastructure. And it is a question of leveraging that. So the missing pieces for me are LNG import terminals. And if you want to put a number on that, I mean, these are not out of hand numbers. You're talking sort of $500 million. Might sound like $1 billion here, $1 billion there, suddenly you've got a lot of money. But $500 million is something eminently bankable and eminently fundable that one can, as a country, invest in. And that's for the import terminal. And you could see that both in Matola maybe and in Richards Bay as well. The pipelines, in terms of Lily pipeline, to maybe get that scaled up and to resize it and reverse the flow, I mean, that pipelines tend to be quite expensive. There's quite a lot of questions here around the amount of steel needed, etc. But those are sort of $500 million to $1 billion just to get the pipeline to run from Richards Bay to Secunda. I am a financial guy, I'm not a technical guy. So these are the numbers that we have in our mind. All of these numbers are eminently doable in terms of investment. The rest of the infrastructure from Secunda, linking up between the Romco and Lily, and then from Secunda into Gauteng, that pipeline network exists. We can absolutely leverage. If you look, just jumping around a little bit, and apologies for that, if you look on the Matola side, it's a very short pipeline that's needed to link into the Romco pipeline, sort of circa 100 kilometers. And that gives you full access into the whole of the Gauteng region, which is really the energy-intensive hub of the country.
Thanks, Keith. I'm just mindful of the time. Let me turn to my ringmaster, Shannon. If I would suggest that we move to some Q's and A's.
I think that's a good idea, Jaco. You can go ahead with that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So, to our audience, I know that we've booked an hour of your day, but I think this has been a very revealing conversation for us, and I suggest you're welcome to stay on. We will probably push on a little bit to deal with some of the Q&As. So I want to start off, I'm turning to the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to post them there. I see there's some in the chat box. Please just move them across if you don't mind. I I want to turn to a very straightforward question from Rex Zitzman. Nobody is talking about shale gas. Is this dead? We are 7th ranked in world reserves around shale gas. Any views from the panel on shale gas?
Okay, you can see we're all sort of ducking under the table a little bit. It's a very difficult topic. I mean, I think Muzi will be the first to note that there's environmental challenges, in any hydrocarbon event. So you can imagine shale gas is going to attract a lot of focus, which just it doesn't mean it's dead. It just means that it just looks harder and much further away. And equally, you're trying to build up both sides of the business there. Have we got enough demand to justify investment in shale gas in very disparate areas in the Karoo? How do you get that gas to somewhere economic? And then you've got to go through all the environmental issues. So it's a tricky one. Remember, yeah, let's leave it at that.
It does appear that the government has got still a poker in the fire. I think it is continuing to sink a hole here and there as part of its exploration programs. I think from our perspective, it requires massive supporting infrastructure investment and development. The environmental issues aside, we are sitting with significant upstream resources of gas already available to us. Again, referring to Luiperd Brolpadda, for example. So right now, it is difficult to answer that question. I agree, whether it's dead or not. There's certainly very little movement compared to 10 years ago, when there was certainly interest from international oil companies in that space. Craig Morkel asked the question, given the cost of load shedding to the South African economy and our battle against joblessness, can we justifiably support not promoting the exploration of our local gas resources and using gas instead of imported diesel at huge cost? This will draw investment into South Africa and create jobs, a game changer for sure. I would like us to comment on that. I think it's a very, very pertinent and valid question. We see that regionally, particularly in the SADC space, the significant advances that is happening upstream in Mozambique, of course, midstream as well, and now Namibia. South Africa clearly are blessed with the same resources, but we seemingly lagging in terms of those the exploitation of the resources. Any comments from the panel on that?
I mean, from my perspective, both of these issues are just, the shale gas issue as well as any domestic offshore development is purely a commercial issue. And as a country, we tend to hype up the maturity of these finds. They're not as mature as people think they are. And they have to be able to exist in an international commercial environment. And that is the conversation we're not really having in South Africa. Let's put the data on the table. Let's work out what it would take. The timelines are particularly problematic. I think that we would have to develop these resources very quickly in order to take advantage of what demand is left in the system. And we certainly see demand for gas from developed economies declining year on year. And so yeah, it's a purely commercial issue. Obviously, there will also be massive environmental issues and massive social license to operate issues that would have to be dealt with in parallel. There are a lot of people that do not want these kinds of investments in our country and will take you to court. They feel so strongly. And so building those kinds of delays into the timelines is just part of what you'd have to do. But what we need is more data and more public discussion on these issues.
It certainly doesn't seem to stop the investment that's currently happening in our neighboring countries. I mean, do you think that we are missing an opportunity, not only for domestic consumption? We're talking about becoming a global export hub for gas. the gas demand, in our view, is not necessarily the growth may flatten out. I fully agree with you, but it's the demand for decades to come, in our view, is not necessarily to disappear. You know, how do you view that, Steve? And maybe a question to the panel as well.
Yeah, so again, I think that depends on your assumptions about how organized the global economy gets to try to meet its 1.5-degree goals. If we do achieve those goals, there will be a significant drop-off. If we don't achieve those goals, which is looking likely, then there might be a lower drop-off. But then, of course, you have other issues that come into play as a result of higher temperatures. That would also impact the commercialization of some of these investments. From what I understand, certainly the Namibian opportunity isn't going ahead as quickly as people think it is. And certainly Mozambique has had similar kinds of challenges. So I'm not sure the narrative that our neighbors are taking advantage of this gas boom is true. But again, I'm not an expert on that. But yeah, but the main issue is what do you believe about the world, and are we serious about achieving a 1.5-degree goal or not? And that's an open question.
I see here another interesting question by Clay Musaya. The question, surely the answer is that the renewables integration up to 100% is not feasible or advisable. Even 50% cannot be handled by our grids. The cost of accommodating 50% intermittent power, even with batteries, would destroy most economies. Look at Germany. I think it comes back to this particular debate, that is ongoing. But again, a question to the panel: how do you view that particular statement?
Yeah, maybe I sorry,
I'll ask Keith to start. You can go, Keith, and then Todd, please.
Yeah, I mean, these binary debates, I don't think it's ever going to be binary. We'll keep on throwing renewables onto the grid, and you'll never get to 100%. It wouldn't make a stable grid. Definitely one needs battery storage to then support that. And then, of course, on the bigger scale, you definitely need some sort of base load, so sort of firm power supply. So I don't think we're ever going to go to 100%. We need all the generation sources, and then as technology progresses and battery storage becomes cheaper, and the grid will evolve, or the sources of energy will evolve.
Todd, any comments?
So maybe I can comment on the reference to Germany. So Germany, of course, have taken some hard decisions on closing down their nuclear plants and also decommissioning their coal plants and increasing very rapidly the renewables. But we also see they are turning into more and more gas plants. So Germany is going to tender for 10 gigawatt of flexible gas plants by this year, which then also are required to have a conversion solution for, let's say, sustainable fuel, hydrogen, in a certain time period. So this is how they are tackling this dilemma, to be able to handle the flexibility and also to provide some additional base power if the demand is really high on a winter day. The other comment I would like to make is now we are discussing gas molecules moving from one country to the others. What we have seen in Northern Europe, we are having a common market. So we have Nord Pool. We see that the hydro power plant in Northern Europe are supplying Germany with electricity on the days where they so the bilateral and the Southern Africa power pool and how that is working and are providing to even out the need and the differences of the neighboring countries, I think also is important that the mechanism and the markets in the Southern Africa power pool also is being looked at, because it might not be the optimum that it's the molecules that should be transferred. Maybe it's electrons. So I'm not South African, I'm not living in South Africa, but it seems everything is rotating around inside South Africa, maybe more than open a wider view. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to write somebody on that we know or I know everything, but at least it's an observation from my end.
Thanks, Todd. There is a interesting question around the role of the state. In other words, just want to get to that. So it's a question by Joshua Leroux. Best project seems to be Matola. How will government support this gas to power project to move consumption to about 100 petajoules for project to reach FID? I think there's an earlier question also around what probably added to that. I noticed there was a question around the role of the state in gas type infrastructure. We're talking here about network economics, of course, or utility type infrastructure. So from the panel, I mean, where would we see the role of the state given the current gas issue that we faced with, the gas crisis, and sort of the longer term role around this? Maybe Muzi, if I can start with you. You're obviously close to the ground with regards to the state positions around these things.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jaco. Well, I guess the role of the state for me is always going to be to create a enabling environment for these types of investments. And post the promulgation of the IRP 2019, before we went to the draft that we have now, there are a couple of decisions that were made. And one of those decisions was the development of the Energy Action Plan, which was designed, one, to reduce the impact of load shedding, but also to achieve the energy security at the time. And the plan had a very important component, and one of those components, in fact, two of them, was to ensure that we are able to improve the availability of existing power generation plants, but also enabling the acceleration of the private sector investments in the power generation. And this probably might be outside of gas that is being driven for industrial use, but very specific to power. And in our case here, we are interested in the gas to power. And we want to then see what will be the role of government in enabling the gas to power investments to continue and to flourish. I do believe that the recent announcement, for example, insofar as the gas master plan, which started very long time ago when it was the gas utilization master plan, which we've just now been indicated that it will be presented to cabinet to allow for at least some certainty around gas prices, around the use of gas and the permittings, around all of those type of issues, will be the key role of government to create this enabling environment that will allow for certainty to prevail in the market and allow for investments to flow. I do believe that to a greater extent, government has done that part. There are areas of improvement where government could have done certain things much quicker and not waited until we are finding ourselves at the point where we are. So decisions could be made faster to allow for certain investment decisions to be made quite quicker as well. So I do think that the role of government in the main, as part of accelerating the procurement of new generation capacity, as part of ensuring that we can create energy security, as part of ensuring that we allow these investments in gas to flow, that they will need to create policy certainty around those particular matters.
Thanks, Muzi, for those insights. I'm just turning to the question box. I want to sort of cover this question and then move. I see there's various questions around hydrogen. But I think Himzi Turkolo asks, question for Steve. EU in the emergency for gas, reclassified gas as green. Why is this not factored in this narrative of competitive forces against South African products? What about the actual benefit of moving from coal to gas electricity and the benefit of that?
Yeah, so maybe I can answer that and also conclude some of the questions also in the chat and my comments for the day. These are incredibly complex topics that are also subject to a lot of misapprehension and misinformation, often even in the media. So the media gets these things wrong quite often. So it's not true to say that our grids can't accommodate higher penetrations of renewables. Some of the points about Texas and California struggling to thrive on renewables is not true. Many of the points made about Germany also not true. It is true that the EU are looking to get gas, but that is to replace the loss of a supply they had as a result of the Ukraine-Russian conflict. And so it's not a need to put on additional fuels. You also need to keep in mind this idea of installed capacity versus utilization or capacity factors. And so we've got to be very careful of these kinds of narratives. It's also not true to say that the EU has reclassified gas as green. This narrative comes out of the EU green taxonomy, which has gas as an option, but there are a whole bunch of limitations to when you can do gas. So they're not talking about baseload gas. They're not talking about gas beyond 2050. And so these kinds of lines are sort of born out of the misinformation engines that are out there. Our responsibility is to turn to kind of really credible sources of data on these transitions, and unfortunately just be skeptical about what you read.
Thank you very much. I just want to, if I can maybe just beg a few minutes from our ringmaster, the issue around hydrogen. It's come up in the text box a couple of times. And the question here is from Hugo de Koning. Will it ever become economical, viable to develop the required hydrogen quantities to run power stations in California? Apparently, hydrogen to cars is sometimes stopped because of lack of demand and too high cost. I mean, hydrogen, where from now until 2100 do we position hydrogen as a absolute feedstock into our energy requirements? It is an emerging energy type, as was solar panels 30 years ago, absolutely. It is definitely something to keep in mind. So a question to the panel, maybe Keith, to yourself from the finance sector, what do you see in that space? And then maybe Todd, if you could add to that.
Yeah, Jaco, I mean, I don't have a huge background in hydrogen, but it does seem early stage. Not really the space for senior debt right now. A lot of interesting projects that we watch, as I say, with interest. And for now, we need to see that economy of scale and the learning before it becomes a proper industrial source of fuel.
Thanks, Todd. Any trends that you witness globally and developments in the hydrogen space, and perhaps how is Wärtsilä set up to adapt or move into that space?
Thank you, Jaakko. So for us, we have a view on the roadmap for the sustainable fuel, whether it is for the marine industry and or the energy space. We see in the marine industry there is a drive for ammonia to be as a sustainable fuel, so produced out of hydrogen. We have this year or last year we released the first 100% ammonia engine. We see also that methanol from as a sustainable fuel is available. On the energy side, I think we are of the view that hydrogen is the likely fuel to be used in the energy space, but we are not ruling out the other fuels as well. So from our side, we have said that we are doing blends from a couple of years ago up to around 26, 27, where we will have the 100% pilot, and then after that we will, so 2030 and onwards, we will have conversion package and we will have 100% hydrogen engines available to the market. But at the same time, we always need to balance this, whether the market is there or not. But this is the present timeline that we have for energy business. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. To our audience, I think we can basically conclude our conversation today, and to our panelists, we really appreciate your insights and your inputs. The issue around gas to power in a South African context, in our view, the debate is certainly not settled here today. But it is true that we're finding ourselves in a very peculiar position in South Africa where we need to play catch up, where our ability to adopt large-scale renewables is not there yet, based on our infrastructure limitations. We have to fill various gaps in the interim. We are faced with gas energy shortages, risks to the economy, and we may well, if we don't throw this, or if this dice don't fall right, we may well end up not having an economy because we can't bridge our gas requirements, and then the whole power discussion also goes away. So it is a fascinating year for natural gas. I think lots of things are coming to a head in the policy space, from the PCC, from an infrastructure development space, from a technology space, and I think in a year's time, I would look forward to having another conversation like this to see where we've come and how we've progressed this year. So for that, thank you very much. Shannon, if I can then hand over to you.
Thanks, Jaakko. That brings us to the end of the discussion. I'd like to say thank you to our facilitator, Jaakko Hyman, for enabling a robust and engaging discussion. Thank you also to our panelists, Steve Nicholls from South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission, Muzi Shange from Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, Todd Johnson from Wärtsilä Energy, and Keith Webb from RMB. Thank you to our sponsors, Wärtsilä Energy, Richards Bay Industrial Development Zone, Energas, and CNG Holdings for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on the role of gas in South Africa's energy transition. We hope you found this event engaging and informative, and we thank you for participating. The recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course, and if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Our next webinar is on the 27th of March at 2 p.m. and will focus on South Africa's water infrastructure. The link to register for that webinar has been shared in the chat. We hope to see you all then. Thank you for your time and goodbye.